You begin with the quiet assumption that knowledge is stable. You believe that once you understand something, the understanding itself guarantees its truth. This confidence feels natural because the mind rarely examines the basis of its judgments. It presents thoughts as facts, and you accept them as such. Yet Al-Ghazali challenges this ease. He asks whether knowledge is trustworthy merely because it appears coherent, or whether coherence is simply the mind agreeing with itself. You begin to notice how quickly you equate familiarity with truth. The mind rehearses an idea, repeats it, and then treats repetition as verification. What feels certain may simply be a habit made invisible through constant use. If the mind is convinced because it convinces itself, where does real certainty begin? Al-Ghazali lived in an intellectually charged environment. Philosophers debated with precision, theologians defended doctrine with rigor, and mystics sought inner awareness through disciplined introspection. Baghdad, in his time, was a center of thought where every school claimed authority over truth. Yet the very diversity of these claims revealed something deeper. Consensus was absent even among experts. Arguments were refined, but agreement remained elusive. Observing this, Al-Ghazali questioned whether certainty could come from any external school when the instrument evaluating these schools, the human mind, remained untested. If each discipline insists on its own clarity, what stands beyond their competing claims? Al-Ghazali reached a point where every confidence he possessed became questionable. Logical demonstrations that once felt solid now seemed dependent on assumptions the mind had never proven. Theological explanations rested on inherited frameworks that he had accepted without examination. Even philosophical arguments, though elegant, felt vulnerable to deeper skepticism. As you reflect on this, you realize that the mind can construct explanations without ever validating its own foundations. It can build entire systems of thought while ignoring the possibility that its basic operations may be incomplete or biased. When the core instrument becomes uncertain, every conclusion drawn from it becomes uncertain as well. If the ground is unstable, how can anything built upon it claim stability? Reason appears powerful because it organizes experience into structured conclusions. It identifies patterns, resolves contradictions, and produces arguments that feel transparent. But Al-Ghazali points out that reason operates only within the limits of its own framework. It does not reach beyond the structure it uses. Reason cannot step outside itself to verify whether its categories actually correspond to reality. It works with what it is given, accepting basic assumptions without proof. When these assumptions remain unexamined, rational conclusions may be orderly yet incomplete. You begin to see that reason offers coherence, not certainty, structure, not truth. If reason cannot validate the foundations it relies on, can it ever claim final authority? Al-Ghazali turned his attention to something deeper than reason, the state of the inner self. He observed that knowledge is shaped not only by logic but also by the condition of the heart, the center of intention, motivation, and judgment. You begin to notice how your own conclusions shift depending on desire, fear, or attachment. A biased heart selects evidence that supports its preferences and rejects anything that threatens them. Even rational arguments can be guided by hidden inclinations rather than impartial observation. Al-Ghazali suggests that the heart must be free of distortion for true knowledge to appear. When intention becomes clear and bias dissolves, understanding aligns with what is real instead of what is desired. If the heart shapes knowledge, how can knowledge be pure while the heart remains unclear? Al-Ghazali did not treat doubt as failure but as a necessary discipline. Doubt exposes assumptions that have been accepted without reflection. It reveals where understanding is based on habit rather than insight. As you follow this path, you begin to see how doubt becomes a tool for refining perception. Instead of destabilizing you, it sharpens your awareness. It strips away unexamined beliefs and forces you to confront the limits of inherited certainty. Doubt, for Al-Ghazali, is not an end but a method. It clears space for a deeper form of knowing to emerge, one that is not built on repetition, desire, or imitation. If doubt removes what is false, what remains when everything questionable is set aside? Al-Ghazali examined the senses and found them unreliable as foundations for certainty. The senses present impressions rather than truths. They show variations as stable, changes as fixed, and temporary conditions as permanent. When you observe this in your own experience, you notice how easily perception shifts. A sound seems near and then reveals itself to be far. A shape appears solid but changes depending on position or context. Even time feels different depending on attention and emotion. If the senses offer inconsistent data, reason, which depends on sensory input, inherits this inconsistency. Rational structures built on unstable impressions may themselves be unstable. This does not mean the senses are useless. They are functional tools for navigating the world. But they cannot anchor certainty. They provide information, not truth. If the senses cannot confirm reality and reason relies on the senses, where can unshakable knowledge be found? Al-Ghazali recognized that the mind operates through assumptions it does not acknowledge. Conceptual categories, such as cause, effect, identity, and existence, are accepted automatically. They feel self-evident because you have used them since childhood. But when you examine these categories closely, you notice that the mind has never proven them. It merely uses them. They function like inherited tools whose origins remain untested. Your thoughts follow familiar pathways because they have been shaped by language, culture, memory, and personal experience. What appears as independent reasoning is often the repetition of established patterns. When you reflect on this, you begin to understand that the mind cannot claim ownership of the assumptions it uses, nor can it guarantee their universal validity. If thought relies on structures it never chose and cannot verify, how can it claim to reveal reality as it is? Al-Ghazali understood that skepticism has limits. While doubt is useful for clearing false certainty, endless doubt becomes self-defeating. If everything is doubted, then doubt itself becomes meaningless. You recognize this in your own reflections. If you attempt to question every belief, every perception, and every thought, the process eventually collapses. You reach a point where no conclusion is possible because the act of doubting destroys the ground upon which doubt stands. Pure skepticism cannot guide action or support judgment. It cannot explain why you trust its method while rejecting everything else. For Al-Ghazali, skepticism is a tool, not a destination. It must be used to refine clarity, not to eliminate all possibility of knowing. If skepticism undermines everything, including itself, what remains available as a foundation for understanding? Al-Ghazali found that the search for certainty could not be completed externally. No argument, doctrine, or method could provide what the mind itself could not confirm. The inquiry had to turn inward, toward the nature of awareness itself. You begin to explore this shift. Instead of seeking certainty through additional information or sharper analysis, you examine the one who is seeking. You observe thoughts rising and falling, judgments forming and dissolving, preferences shaping conclusions. In this observation, you notice something subtle. Awareness precedes thought. It is not produced by thinking, It makes thinking possible. It is the condition under which reason operates. Al-Ghazali realized that certainty may arise not from intellectual construction but from this deeper dimension of awareness, one that is not distorted by bias, fear, or habit. If awareness is prior to thought, could certainty belong to awareness rather than to thinking? Al-Ghazali described a form of clarity that does not depend on argument. It is not a conclusion but a recognition. When the noise of assumption and doubt becomes quiet, awareness reflects reality without interference. You begin to see that understanding arises not from effort but from transparency. When you stop forcing the mind to settle on conclusions, insight appears naturally. This is not the victory of thought but the release of its compulsions. Certainty becomes an event, not a construction, something noticed rather than produced. If clarity emerges only when the mind stops insisting, is insistence the very thing that keeps truth hidden? At the end of the inquiry, you recognize what Al-Ghazali discovered. The mind is not the source of certainty. It is a tool for navigating experience, not the foundation of truth. When its limits are acknowledged, it becomes quiet. In this quiet, awareness stands on its own. It does not claim certainty, it does not defend it. It simply rests in what is evident without distortion. Knowing becomes silent, not because there is nothing to know, but because nothing more is needed for clarity to appear. If truth reveals itself only when the searcher withdraws, what remains to claim ownership of what is revealed?